She's unstable, Your Honor. She works 20-hour stretches and doesn't know her own name, let alone how to manage $250,000. That was my father, Donald Holt, 58 years old, retired middle manager, standing in a courtroom in Stamford, Connecticut, pointing at me like I was a stranger he'd found wandering the street. I was sitting at the respondent's table in a navy blazer I'd ironed at 4 a.m. because I'd just come off a 12-hour ICU shift. My hands were folded. My breathing was even. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I looked at him the way you look at a patient whose vitals have already flatlined, but the family hasn't accepted it yet. I'm tired, Dad, but I'm not the one who's lost. I said it quietly, not for the courtroom, not for the judge, for me. And that was the moment something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break. If you've ever had a family member treat you like you didn't matter, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me take you back. Because this didn't start in a courtroom. It started 4 years ago, in a hospital break room that smelled like burnt coffee and latex gloves, with a phone call from my mother that I should have let go to voicemail. My grandmother, Eleanor Wright, passed away on a Tuesday in October. She was 81. She'd been a school librarian for 37 years in a town so small you could walk from one end to the other in 15 minutes. She never made more than $42,000 a year. But Eleanor Wright was careful. She was deliberate. She clipped coupons, drove the same Buick for 19 years, and put every spare dollar into an education trust she'd started the year I was born. By the time she died, that trust held $275,000. She left it to me. Not to my parents, not to my brother, to me, Bridget Elaine Holt, sole beneficiary. She named me in every document, notarized every page, and filed it with an estate attorney she'd chosen herself. A man named Arthur Miller, 62 years old, dry as chalk dust and twice as precise. He'd handled her paperwork for over a decade. When the family learned about the trust, the air in the room changed. I could feel it. My father sat at my grandmother's kitchen table the day after the funeral, reading through the estate summary Arthur had mailed, and he didn't say a word. He just set the paper down, looked at my mother, and exhaled through his nose. My mother, Sharon, was the one who spoke first. She always was. Well, she said, that's a lot of responsibility for someone who sleeps during the day and works when normal people are in bed. That was how she described my career. I was a registered nurse in the intensive care unit at Stamford Memorial Hospital. I worked the night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 3 to 4 nights a week. My base salary was $98,000. With night shift differential and overtime, I brought home $120,000 a year. I'd been doing it since I was 23, but to my mother, I lived an irregular life. That was her phrase. She said it the way you'd describe someone with a criminal record. My brother Wesley was 20 at the time. He was the youngest, the golden child. He'd dropped out of community college after one semester, but my parents still talked about him like he was one good break away from running a Fortune 500 company. Dad had paid for Wesley's car. Mom had co-signed his apartment lease. When Wesley wanted to try day trading, they gave him $4,000 in seed money. When he wanted to start a clothing brand, they gave him encouragement and a laptop. When I graduated nursing school with honors, my mother asked if I could pick up Wesley's dry cleaning on my way home from the ceremony. I swallowed it. I told myself that was simply what family did. Then the phone call started. 3 months after the funeral, Sharon called me at 6:48 a.m. I had just clocked out. My scrub still smelled like antiseptic and adrenaline. I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage with my eyes half closed, and she told me Wesley was in trouble. He owed $8,200 to a friend, something about a loan that had gone sideways. She didn't use the word gambling. Not then. She said he just needed help getting back on his feet. You have that trust money sitting there, she said, and your brother is drowning. I didn't touch the trust. That money was for education and medical expenses only. Grandmother had been specific, but I started sending Wesley $1,200 a month from my own checking account. My own earnings, every single month on the first, like clockwork. Sharon told me it was for rent. She said Wesley had found an apartment and was trying to stabilize. She said he was looking for work. She said $1,200 was the difference between him making it and ending up on the street. I believed her. For 3 years, I believed her. That was $1,200 a month for 36 months, $43,200 total from my pocket, not from Eleanor Wright's trust, from 12-hour shifts in rooms where people stopped breathing and I brought them back. But it didn't stop there. 18 months in, Sharon called again. Wesley had a business idea. A legitimate one, she said. Some kind of online retail venture. He just needed startup capital. She asked for $15,000. I transferred it the next morning. The business failed within 4 months. Wesley never mentioned it again. Neither did my parents. Then Sharon's medical bills came. A procedure, a follow-up, physical therapy. She said insurance didn't cover everything. She asked me to help with the gap. $6,500. I paid it without hesitation. And through all of it, not once did anyone say thank you. Not once did my father acknowledge that his 29-year-old daughter was keeping his 24-year-old son afloat. Not once did my mother ask how I was doing, whether I was sleeping, whether the night shifts were wearing me down, because they didn't see the money as help. They saw it as obligation. They saw me as the family ATM with an irregular schedule and no right to say no. Then I found out about Lily Holt, 7 years old, Wesley's daughter, my niece. Wesley had told me 6 months earlier that Lily needed private tutoring. He said the school recommended it. He said it cost $400 a month and he couldn't swing it. I added it to the $1,200 I was already sending. I also covered what he said were Lily's healthcare copays. I didn't ask for receipts. He was her father. I trusted him. Then one Saturday afternoon, I drove to Wesley's apartment to drop off a birthday gift for Lily. She answered the door in a pair of sneakers that were cracked along the sole and at least 2 sizes too small. Her toes were curled inside them. She walked on the edges of her feet like she'd learned to compensate. I knelt down. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at those shoes. Uncle Wes said new ones are coming, Lily said. Her voice was small. She wasn't complaining. She'd already learned not to expect things. I asked about gymnastics. Lily had been in a class, $180 a month. She loved it. She talked about it constantly the last time I'd seen her, showing me a cartwheel in the hallway with her arms spread wide and her grin so big it nearly split her face. I don't go anymore, she said. She looked at the floor. Daddy forgot to pay. I stayed quiet. I stayed very still. I drove home that night and opened my banking app. I scrolled through 3 years of transfers to Wesley. $1,200 a month. The $15,000 lump sum. The tutoring payments. The healthcare copays. All of it, documented, time-stamped, every single one. Then I checked. There was no tutoring program. Lily's school had no record of any recommendation. The healthcare copays had been covered by Wesley's state insurance the entire time. The money I'd been sending for Lily's care had never reached Lily. I sat at my kitchen table at 3:17 a.m. The house was dark except for the glow of my laptop screen. I could hear the furnace clicking, nothing else. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. Something inside me had already shifted. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. Wesley had $82,500 in high-interest gambling debt. I didn't know the exact number then. I'd learn it later, in court documents, printed in black ink on white paper. But I knew enough. I knew where my $1,200 a month had been going. I knew where Lily's tutoring money had gone. I knew what the $15,000 startup had really funded. And I knew my parents knew too. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the hospital hallway at 7:15 a.m. I had just finished a 12-hour shift. My feet ached. My eyes burned. I was holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold in my hand, waiting for the elevator, thinking about nothing but my bed. My mother was waiting for me. She stepped into my path, holding a manila envelope. "You're not well, Bridget," she screamed. "You're delusional and overworked, and we're taking control for your own good." She shoved the envelope into my hand. I opened the envelope right there, standing under the fluorescent lights with my badge still clipped to my chest. Inside were conservatorship papers, filed by Donald and Sharon Holt, my parents. They were petitioning the Stanford Probate Court to declare me mentally unfit to manage my own finances. They cited my erratic sleep patterns, my inability to maintain normal social relationships due to shift work, and my deteriorating judgment as evidenced by her refusal to allocate family resources appropriately. Family resources. That was how they described my grandmother's trust. The $275,000 Eleanor Wright had saved over 37 years of clipping coupons and driving the same Buick. The money she had left to me. Only to me. My parents wanted control of it, and they were willing to call me insane to get it. I folded the papers back into the envelope. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and the parking garage lights buzzing overhead. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my father. I didn't call Wesley. I called Arthur Miller. He answered on the second ring. I read him the filing number. He was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, "They triggered the clause." I closed my eyes. "I know," I said. I was done pretending this was okay. The morning of the hearing, I sat in Arthur Miller's office at exactly 8:12 a.m. He had a cup of black coffee on his desk that he hadn't touched. I had one in my hand that I'd already finished. I'd slept 4 hours. That was a good night for me. Arthur slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside was a single document encased in a clear plastic sleeve. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. The notary seal was raised, textured under my fingertip. Eleanor Wright's signature sat at the bottom in her careful schoolteacher cursive, dated 11 years ago when I was 18, and had just told her I wanted to be a nurse. She filed this the same week she created the trust, Arthur said, gave me the original with specific instructions. I was to produce it only if a family member initiated legal proceedings to access or redirect the funds. I looked at the letter. I read it twice, then I set it down. "And they don't know this exists," I said. "No one does. Your grandmother wanted it that way." She said, and I'm quoting from my notes, "If they ever come for it, Bridget will need proof that I saw them clearly." I didn't cry. I sat with it. The quiet in the room was steady, and so was I. What happens when you present this?" I asked. Arthur folded his hands. "The morality clause is unambiguous. Any beneficiary or family member who initiates legal action to challenge your competence or redirect the trust's distribution is permanently and irrevocably barred from all future disbursements. The trust converts to a private, sealed endowment in your name alone. No appeals, no amendments, no exceptions. And the conservatorship petition counts as legal action. It's the textbook trigger," he said. "They didn't just file a petition, they filed their own disqualification." I looked at the window. The light was gray. It had rained overnight, and the street was still wet. I could see my reflection faintly in the glass, and I looked exactly like what I was. A 29-year-old woman who hadn't slept enough in 6 years, who had given $43,200 of her own money to people who were now trying to take $275,000 more. I kept my voice steady. "Let's go." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled walls, low ceiling, fluorescent lighting that hummed at a frequency I recognized from the hospital. Judge Margaret Wilson sat at the bench. She was 65, silver-haired, reading glasses on a chain. She didn't smile when we entered. She didn't smile when my parents entered either. She looked like a woman who had heard every version of every family's worst day and had stopped being surprised a long time ago. My father sat at the petitioner's table in a suit I'd never seen before. It fit poorly across the shoulders. My mother sat beside him in a cream blouse, clutching her purse like a life preserver. Wesley wasn't there. I noticed that immediately. The son whose debts had started all of this couldn't be bothered to show up. Their attorney, a man named David Harris, stood first. He was younger than Arthur, sharper dressed, and clearly working on contingency. He presented their case with the confidence of someone who had never actually read the trust documents. He showed the court 3 photographs. In the first, I was asleep in my car in the hospital parking garage, head tilted against the window. In the second, I was sitting on a bench outside the ER entrance at what appeared to be 4 a.m, eyes closed, still in scrubs. In the third, I was walking across the parking lot with my coat half off, looking disheveled. "These images," Harris said, "demonstrate a pattern of physical and mental exhaustion consistent with diminished cognitive capacity. Ms. Holt's lifestyle, working through the night, sleeping in vehicles, maintaining no stable social routine, renders her unable to responsibly manage a trust of this magnitude." My father nodded along like he was watching a documentary about someone else's daughter. Judge Wilson looked at the photographs. She set them down. She looked at me. "Ms. Holt, do you work the night shift at Stanford Memorial?" "Yes, Your Honor. 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 3 to 4 nights a week. I've held that position for 6 years. And these photographs, were they taken with your knowledge?" "No, Your Honor." She turned back to Harris. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. Arthur stood. He buttoned his jacket with one hand. He moved slowly, deliberately. "Your Honor, before we address the question of Ms. Holt's competence, I'd like to establish a brief financial record." He opened his folder. He didn't rush. Over the past 36 months, Ms. Holt has voluntarily transferred $43,200 of her personal income to her brother Wesley Holt. That's $1,200 per month, paid on the first of every month from her own checking account. Not from the trust. From wages earned during the night shifts the petitioners now characterize as evidence of instability. He placed a printed transaction history on the judge's bench. 36 lines, 36 transfers, every one time-stamped. In addition, Ms. Holt provided a $15,000 lump sum for a business venture proposed by Wesley Holt. That venture failed within 4 months. She also paid $6,500 in medical expenses for Sharon Holt, the co-petitioner sitting in this courtroom today. My mother's hand tightened on her purse. She didn't look at me. That is $43,200 in direct financial support, plus $21,500 in additional payments given freely, without prompting from any trust provision, by the woman the petitioners claim cannot manage money. Arthur let the silence sit for 3 full seconds. Then he reached into his briefcase and removed the plastic sleeve. Your Honor, I have one final document to enter into the record. This is a notarized letter of intent and condition, executed by Eleanor Wright, the original grantor of the trust, and filed with my office 11 years ago. Harris half stood. Your Honor, we haven't been provided with... This document was sealed per the grantor's instructions, Arthur said, his voice flat and even. It was to be produced only in the event of legal proceedings initiated by a family member against the sole beneficiary. The petitioner's filing is that event. Judge Wilson extended her hand. Arthur placed the letter in it. The courtroom went silent. I could hear my father breathing. Judge Wilson read the letter. She read it once, then again. Then she removed her glasses, set them on the bench, and looked directly at Donald and Sharon Holt. I'm going to read the operative clause aloud for the record, she said. My father shifted in his seat. Any beneficiary, heir, or family member of the Wright or Holt families who initiates, joins, or materially supports any legal action, petition, or proceeding intended to challenge Bridget Elaine Holt's mental competence, financial fitness, or right to sole stewardship of this trust shall be immediately and permanently barred from all current and future disbursements. Upon activation of this clause, the trust shall convert to a private, sealed endowment for the exclusive benefit of Bridget Elaine Holt. This provision is irrevocable and may not be amended, appealed, or overridden by any party, including the trustee. She set the letter down. This clause is valid. It is notarized. It is unambiguous. My father's chair scraped against the floor. He didn't stand all the way. His knees seemed to lock halfway up, and he gripped the edge of the table. That can't be, he started. Mr. Holt, Judge Wilson said, sit down. He sat. The petition for conservatorship is denied. The trust in the amount of $275,000 is hereby sealed as a private endowment for the sole benefit of Bridget Elaine Holt, per the grantor's stated conditions. No further challenges to this trust will be entertained by this court, or any court in this jurisdiction. She paused. Additionally, I am referring this filing to the State Bar for review of potential abuse of process. The petitioners presented surveillance photographs of a working medical professional taken without consent and characterized standard shift work as evidence of mental incapacity. This court does not find that amusing. She looked at Harris. Counsel, I suggest you advise your clients to prepare for the financial consequences of this filing. Court costs, attorney fees, and any sanctions resulting from the referral will be the petitioner's sole responsibility. Harris said nothing. He closed his folder. We're adjourned. The gavel came down once. I stood. I gathered my bag. Arthur placed the documents back into his briefcase and clicked it shut. The sound was small, precise, final. This isn't a negotiation anymore. By filing this petition, you didn't gain control. You triggered the clause that removes you from my life entirely. I said it without turning around. My voice was even. I didn't raise it. The hallway outside the courtroom was long and narrow, with gray tile floors and overhead lights that buzzed the same way they did at the hospital. I walked toward the exit. My flats made no sound on the tile. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice. It cracked right down the middle. Bridget, wait, please. You don't understand. Your father's pension barely covers the mortgage. We can't absorb $40,000 in legal fees. We can't. Wesley owes $82,500. The house is already leveraged. We have nothing. I stopped. Not because she asked, because I wanted to hear her say it. I wanted the shape of the words to land exactly where they belonged. I turned halfway. She was standing 15 feet behind me. My father was beside her, one hand on the wall, staring at the floor. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. You had $43,200 of mine, I said. You spent it. You let Wesley gamble it. You let Lily wear shoes 2 sizes too small while her father blew my money on sports betting. And when the well ran dry, you didn't ask for help. You tried to have me declared insane. My mother's mouth opened. Nothing came out. This conversation is over. I turned back toward the exit. I walked through the double doors. I crossed the parking lot. I got into my car. The engine started with a low, steady hum. I pulled out of the lot without looking back. My phone buzzed before I reached the first stoplight. Then again, then again. The screen kept lighting up over and over. I reached down and turned off the ringer. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the furnace clicking. I opened my phone. 43 missed calls, 19 voicemails. I didn't listen to a single one. I went through my contacts. I blocked my father's number. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked Wesley's number. I removed myself from the family group chat. I deleted every unread message without opening it. I didn't do it in anger. I did it in clarity. The door closed softly, calmly, no slam. Just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. 3 days of silence passed. Real silence. Not the kind where you're waiting for the next phone call or bracing for the doorbell. The kind where the air in your house finally belongs to you. I slept 7 hours that first night. I hadn't slept 7 hours straight in 4 years. I woke up and the sunlight was coming through the kitchen window at an angle I'd never seen before because I was never awake at that hour. In that room, with nothing pulling me out the door or toward my phone. I made coffee. I drank it hot. The whole cup. On the 4th day, an envelope arrived from Arthur Miller's office. Inside was the final trust certification. $275,000, sealed, private, my name the only one on every page. I read it at the kitchen table, set it in the fireproof lockbox I kept in my closet, and closed the lid. That was the last piece of paperwork I would ever need from that chapter of my life. I went back to work the following Monday, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. The ICU was short-staffed, the way it always was. I started an IV on a 60-year-old man whose kidneys were failing. I charted vitals on a teenager who'd been in a car accident. I paged a resident at 2:14 a.m. because a patient's oxygen saturation dropped below 88. I did my job the same way I'd always done it, methodically, calmly, and with my full mind. The only difference was that when my shift ended, I drove home without checking my phone for missed calls from people who had never once asked how my shift went. A week later, Arthur sent a brief email. Donald and Sharon's attorney, David Harris, had formally withdrawn from representation. The state bar referral was proceeding. And the court had assessed $40,000 in combined legal fees, filing costs, and sanctions against Donald and Sharon Holt. Payment was due within 90 days. I read the email once. I closed my laptop. I poured a second cup of coffee. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. I felt the same thing you feel when you finally take off a pair of shoes that have been too tight for years, and you look down at your feet and wonder how you walked that long without stopping. I let it go to voicemail every time. And eventually the calls stopped coming because there was no number left to call. 3 weeks later, I got a different kind of call. This one I answered. It was from Lily's school. The guidance counselor, a woman named Susan Taylor, told me that Lily had been absent for 6 consecutive days. When she returned, she was wearing the same clothes she'd worn the previous week. Her lunch bag was empty. I drove to Wesley's apartment that evening. He wasn't there. Lily answered the door. She was wearing a sweatshirt with a stain on the collar and those same cracked sneakers, the ones 2 sizes too small. The apartment smelled like old takeout containers and stale air. The lights in the hallway were off. The television was on, volume low, playing to no one. "Hi, Aunt Bridget," she said. Her voice was small but steady. She'd already learned how to hold herself together in a room that was falling apart. I knelt down. I didn't ask where her father was. I didn't ask about school. I looked at her shoes, then I looked at her face. "How about you come stay with me for a little while?" I said. She nodded. She didn't ask why. She went to her room and came back with a backpack that had a broken zipper. Inside were 2 shirts, a pair of leggings, and a stuffed rabbit with one ear coming loose at the seam. That was everything she owned that mattered to her. I filed for temporary guardianship the next morning. Arthur handled the paperwork. Wesley didn't contest it. He didn't even respond to the filing. The court granted it in 9 days. The weeks following the hearing felt like walking through thickening fog, but only for the people who had built their lives on money that was never theirs. 8 months later, everything had changed. Donald and Sharon couldn't pay the $40,000. They tried refinancing the house, but the mortgage was already leveraged from a home equity line they'd taken out 2 years earlier to cover Wesley's debts. The bank denied the application. The legal fees went to collections. Then the mortgage payments started slipping. First 1 month, then 2. By the 9th month, the house went into foreclosure. They sold it for less than they owed. A 3-bedroom colonial in Stamford that my mother had spent 26 years decorating sold at a loss of $31,000 after fees. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town with shared laundry in the basement and a parking lot that flooded when it rained. My father, the retired middle manager with the dwindling pension, started driving for a rideshare company 4 nights a week. He was 58 years old, sitting in his car at 11 p.m., waiting for strangers to request a ride, in the same city where he once told people his daughter's career was irregular. My mother got a part-time job at a grocery store. She worked the register 3 days a week. She didn't tell her friends, but a woman from her old book club saw her scanning canned goods on a Tuesday afternoon and mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to someone else. The whisper moved through their social circle in less than a week. Sharon stopped attending book club. She stopped going to the women's group at church. She stopped answering calls from people who used to sit at her dinner table. Wesley filed for bankruptcy. Chapter 7. His $82,500 in gambling debt was partially discharged, but the damage to his credit was total. His score dropped to 439. No landlord would approve him. No dealership would finance him. He moved into my parents' 2nd bedroom in the 2-bedroom apartment, which meant my father slept on a fold-out couch in the living room 4 nights a week. The car Wesley had been driving, the one my father had paid for years ago, was repossessed in month 10. He started taking the bus. I heard these details the way you hear about weather in a city you used to live in, through a former co-worker of my mother's who still kept in touch with a cousin of mine. Through public records Arthur flagged during the trust finalization. Through the bankruptcy filing, which was a matter of public record. I didn't seek the information out. I didn't need to. The collapse made its own noise. 12 months after the hearing, I sat in my kitchen on a Saturday morning. The windows were open. It was early June, and the air smelled like cut grass and warm concrete. I had a cup of coffee in my hand. It was still hot. Lily was in the backyard. I'd rented a small house with a fenced yard 2 months after she came to stay with me. Her room was painted lavender because she'd picked the color herself, standing in the hardware store aisle, holding the sample card up to the light with both hands, studying it like it was the most important decision she'd ever made. She was back in gymnastics, $180 a month. I paid it on the 1st, the same way I used to pay Wesley's rent, except now the money went where it was supposed to go. Her new coach said she was a natural. She'd made the intermediate team. She practiced cartwheels in the hallway the same way she always had, arms wide, grin splitting her face. She had shoes that fit, 3 pairs. She had a lunch bag with food in it every morning. She had a bedroom with a door that closed and a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. She had stability. She had routine. She had someone who showed up. I watched her through the kitchen window. She was doing a handstand against the fence, feet wobbling, tongue poking out the side of her mouth in concentration. She caught me looking and waved upside down with one hand. Almost fell. Laughed so hard she collapsed in the grass. "Did you see that?" she yelled through the open window. "I saw it," I said. She rolled onto her back and looked up at the sky. After a minute, she said, "Aunt Bridget?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad we live here." I took a sip of my coffee. It was still warm. The morning was quiet. The furnace wasn't clicking. The phone wasn't buzzing. There were no missed calls, no voicemails, no manila envelopes waiting on my doorstep. "Me too, Lily." I set my cup down. I looked at the backyard, the fence, the lavender room visible through the hallway, the shoes by the door that actually fit. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, exactly. Not triumph. Something quieter. Relief. Like breathing. Some doors close so better ones can open. I didn't look back. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your future and knowing your worth, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.